Hello, welcome to another Atypical in Philosophy video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Frontline update for the 1st of March 2023. We're going to go straight to the northeast sector, which is the Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna. And there's not really a lot of news, not around the Kupiansk area at the very least. If we go and look on my map, no, that's Bakhmut. We don't want to be there. What are we doing? We are up here, Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna. The Institute for the Study Awards, one of the few kind of sources for stuff, and DEFMON. So I'm going to go to DEFMON first. Svatove-Kreminna, the AFU repulsed attacks around Makhivka, Ploshchanka, Nevska, Kreminna, Dubrova, and Pavlivka. I do not think the Russians have used all their assets yet to attack, and they still have the newly recovered 2nd Division in reserve. I think there is more to come. That's what they say. That's a pro-Ukrainian source. Rebar says nothing. Most of the other sources don't say anything that I normally use. The ISW combines a bunch here, so let's have a look to see what they say. Russian sources claim that Russian forces conducted limited attacks near Svatove. There's fierce fighting around Novoselivska, so that is the Kuzamivka Novoselivska fight going on to the northwest of Svatove. Here we have Kuzamivka, and there is Novoselivska. Still fierce fighting going on there, but not much detail going on coming out there, considering that the Ukrainians were really trying quite hard to, well, first of all, take back Novoselivska and then move downhill to Kuzamivka. There seems to be a stalemate there at the moment. And apparently Ukrainians have been pushed from unspecified high grounds on the Svatove-Kreminna line. I mean, goodness knows where that is. That's according to a Russian source. So other than that, it's Makhivka, Nevska, Ploshchanka, Dubrova, Pavlivka, just to point all of those places out on my map. So these are kind of repelled attacks, although the ISW does say, as we come down here, south of Svatove towards Kreminna. Here we have Kreminna down here. We've got Ploshchanka and Chervonopapivka. They're saying that there's some geolocated footage of Russian tanks active around or to the west of Chervonopapivka to indicate marginal gains perhaps for the Russians in that area. But otherwise, we've got Makhivka, Nevska, repelled attacks, and then Dubrova and Pavlivka, but no real detail about any of that. We go back to ISW. We have Russian offensive. We go back. A Russian mill blogger claimed that while Russian forces in Luhansk Oblast still have the initiative, Russian offensive operations in Luhansk are unsuccessful. So this is a Russian source supporting ISW's previous assessment that Russian forces' offensive in Luhansk lacks sufficient reserves to increase the scale or intensity of the offensive. So remember what DEFMON just said, that he thinks that there are some reserves back there, but what are they doing? How much do they have? What capacity do they have to bring to the fore here? Geolocated footage published shows that that's the 2 tanks I was talking about west of Chervonopapivka, and really that's about it. In fact, until we get down to Bakhmut, it carries on here. Ukrainian forces continue to target Russian concentration areas in the rear of Luhansk Oblast. Geolocated footage published on February the 28th allegedly shows the aftermath of the Ukrainian HIMARS strike on a Russian ammunition warehouse in Avdivka, and I did show you that on my morning news piece, which Avdivka, by the way, is there just sort of between Vuhledar and Luhansk. Now, that was a pretty significant strike. Not too much other explicit information on HIMARS strikes anywhere else in the region. Avdivka seems to be the main one. And we'll go down to Bakhmut now to see what's going on down there. This is a poulet volant map of Bakhmut, and you can see obviously all the pressure from the Russians. You can see that actually they have been pushed back, according to poulet volant, quite a lot from the Ivaniska area here. So that is one area where the Ukrainians might still have something left in the tank to beat back the Russians. Otherwise, in the east, in the south, and particularly in the north, the Russians are making incremental gains on a daily basis. The other pro-Russian sources like Syriac Maps have you Russians having success north of this reservoir there, so that in fact my map will indicate that. So as we come further down south here, past Spiona and the southern Bilorivka, you can see that actually in between, I've got that's the reservoir there. There is Russian success apparently around here, on the way indeed towards Bodanivka and west towards Hirivka, probably pronounced that very badly, and that Jubovo-Vasilivka is in the hands of the Russians. It's a little bit contested in terms of what other mappers think. So here we have Poulet-Volant sort of denying that the Russians have control over that village there. So not 100% sure. Syriac Maps has been pretty accurate recently with regard to what is going on in Bakhmut. Let's go to Defmon first of all. The Ukrainians repulsed attacks around Avdivka, Orikovo, Vasilivka, Dubakivka, Yahidne, Dubova, Vasilivka. That's a village I was talking about that Syriac Map says is under Russian control, and Bodanivka. The Russians are slowly advancing southwest, trying to close the gap around Bakhmut. So I'd say that that's actually where the Ukrainians have had most of their success recently, but he says that they're advancing slowly southwest. I do not think, says Defmon, that Ukraine can keep this up much longer, a few weeks at best. There are some claims, some video claims that Ukrainians have suppressed the Russians in the last 24 hours more than they have done over the previous days. So here we have that kind of update from one of the fighters in Bakhmut saying the enemy has been silenced a little. I've seen another translation saying suppressed, which is, I think, in a video. Yeah, this video down below talks about them being suppressed. It is a little calmer, but there are shooting battles on the outskirts, explosions due to mortars flying, but we are standing in our Bakhmut. No one is going to leave anywhere yet. We are standing. So this is the idea that they're still holding out there. Kenneth Gregg, Swedish fighter in Ukraine, has been in Bakhmut, is not there at the moment, I don't think, but has contacts there. Take this with a grain of salt. Late evening yesterday, he wrote, my boys south of Bakhmut announced that they have attacked the enemy and are pushing them east. That might be what's represented in Poulet-Volant's map here. So pushing them sort of towards the east from here, back from this main supply route, the T0504. This means that the southern end of the pincer is out of play. So there was talk yesterday that actually they're enclosing. There's 4.2 kilometers between these two sort of pincers, these two edges of the pincer. But actually, if the Russians have genuinely been pushed back from the south, then that alleviates the Ukrainians being able to possibly get supplies in through the T0504 and this one further north, which is perilously close to the Russian lines in the north. They're also down the south here by the cemetery area, I think it is. They are pretty close to that T0504 within the southern suburbs themselves. Anyway, Greg continues, I have not yet been in touch with my boys north of the city. Those in the south do not know what is happening in the north. And we've heard about this before, that actually communication, this happened in Vuhledar, where communication between the groups was not great. I don't know whether this is more of an operational decision, a sort of tactical decision on the ground. They might not need to know. But it could also be a communication problem. I know we put a lot of effort into stopping the enemy, so we'll have to wait until the info comes. And today he wrote, the northern part of Bakhmut, after heavy fighting, the enemy has been stopped. Last night's fighting was the fiercest ever in Bakhmut. The enemy suffered enormous losses. So did we. So it's both sides suffering big losses in the north of Bakhmut. 2 of my boys suffered heroic deaths. Long live their memory for our country. So that is an indication that things really are pretty tough in that northern area. If we go and see what ISW has to say. So basically, there's an admission that, the Russians are making gains pretty much everywhere, but Ukrainians have repelled Russian attacks pretty much everywhere as well. So Jubovo, Vasilivka, one of those places, some of these other settlements, Bakivka, Yehidne. There was some claim that there's still a little bit of remnants of Ukrainian resistance in Yehidne, Vasilivka, Bodanivka, and then even Chaziv Yar being attacked by artillery and repelled attacks southwest near Bilahora, just to let you know where Bilahora is. And it's just down over here. They're sort of west of Kupiansk and Ozerianivka. So it looks like the Ukrainians might have some sort of limited success around Ivanivska, but when you look at Syriac maps here, we can see that actually up north there's quite a bit of gained ground right around the northern suburbs there. And then if we allow their maps to go further south here, we can see in the eastern suburbs of Bakhmut that they are continuing to make further progress. So lining things up in the east, they not all mappers will agree on this, but if you look at Vuhledar, for example, in the east, still quite far back from the river in many areas. They don't have it as close as Syriac maps is here, but nonetheless, Syriac maps have been pretty accurate and seem to think that the Ukrainians have been pushed back quite a lot in the east as well as the south, and that's more than we have on Deep State Map as well, which is a pro-Ukrainian mapper. Let's just have a little see what Rebar, the pro-Russian source, has to say. Pretty much agrees with Syriac maps up the north and the east as well, as with that alignment of those lines. The Russian units have aligned the front line along Shed Dryer Street in Bakhmutovka. So Bakhmutovka is this area here. The alignment, I think, is sort of going straight up there now, where that's pretty much a straight line. And then says Wagner have in the south. Wagner have reached Tesselyanaya Street, and in Sobachevka they are fighting in residential buildings. So we're going to check that out in a second. At the moment, the situation of the Ukrainians has deteriorated markedly. Now a partial withdrawal of Ukrainian formations to the opposite bank of the Bakhmut River is being carried out. New firing positions are being equipped in the central districts of the city. Ukrainian artillery groups are firing at the offensive areas of Russian units. At the same time, the use of ammunition is heavily restricted due to problems of the supply of shells. They say targeting is provided by drone crews. 24 drones were detected around Bakhmut during the day. So on their map, they've actually put lots of pictures of drones just to show the range of drones that the Ukrainians are using and bringing to play, I believe. But that's how they see the mapping there, pretty similar to Syriac maps. Apart from in this southern area, they still have Russians quite far forward in a way that they're not, as according to any other mappers. So on the edge of Ivaniska there and going to the west and southwest. That is not what I have on my maps at all. I have them having been sort of beaten back from. So if you think the Russians, Rebar has the Russians here and over there, so quite a lot more territory in that area near Ivanivska, and then over the other side. So that's a canal coming down there. So there are a lot of territory to the west of the canal, whereas I have some territory to the west of the canal. I'd have to check whether that lines up with them. But yeah, so a little bit of variation, but broadly speaking, the Russians are still pressuring the Ukrainians hugely. We will see whether this pincer movement is successful coming from north, and if it interdicts this main supply route here, the T or the O0506, then that could be the signal that Ukraine are in a lot more trouble. There are some minor roads, but basically these two roads are the lifeline for Bakhmut between them somehow, for being able to supply the troops within Bakhmut. Again, I don't know whether Ukraine have any kind of counterattack planned, but they are obviously considering that the calculation in terms of the ratio for the numbers of troops lost by the Russians and the Ukrainians themselves is still in favor of the Ukrainians maintaining their presence in Bakhmut. As we come further south, I mentioned Bilahora and Chasiv Yar. Defmon says the Ukrainians have repulsed attacks around Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, and Bilahora. This side of Bakhmut is fairly stable. I believe most assets are focused on the north at the moment. And again, for him, he has far less presence of the Russians on the west of the canal. In fact, he doesn't have any real meaningful presence to the west of the canal, up in this more northern area towards Tupochki. So again, he would not have the Russians anywhere here at all in any of that area, whereas I do, but I'm going predominantly on the Syriac maps, also rebar as well. Anyway, back to Defmon. So his map, other than the changes there, has the eastern and southern areas under quite a lot of pressure, but again doesn't have, as Syriac maps has, Russians in this north nearly as much, and in fact taking over Dubovo, Vasilivska nearly as much as the Russians do. So there is a difference between Ukrainian and Russian mappers, both north and south there. Okay, let's come out there and come to Avdivka. So pop out, zoom out, and then zoom back in to look at Avdivka, which has a very similar kind of tactical map as Bakhmut, this kind of 2/3 encirclement, although not quite as bad as Bakhmut at the moment by any stretch. As we come on to look at Avdivka, Defmon, just cycling through what Defmon has, he's got this video footage from Igor Girkin, posted by Igor Girkin, who's the Russian military blogger and terrorist. The Ukrainians clearing trenches to the south of Bakhmut. That's on the 27th, so 2 days ago. That's that sort of counter-attacking the Ukrainian south. Anyway, as we come to Avdivka area, which as you can see there, the Russians are putting pressure on up to the north. He says, Defmon says, Ukrainians have repulsed attacks around Kamyanka, Krasnohorivka, so that's in the north, Pervomaisky, that's in the south, Novelsky, slightly further south, Marinka, Pobyeda will come on to that. Like everywhere else, the Russians are not able to attack anything head-on, but rely on enveloping and forking a retreat. This is what they're trying to do both in Bakhmut and Avdivka. And no reports pro-Ukrainian source says in the vicinity of Avdivka, Russian troops north of Kamyanka tried to storm the town of Krasnohorivka. This is now being repulsed by Ukrainian troops for the second time in a row. A renewed attack by Russians is being launched near Pervomaisky as well. The outcome of this is still unclear. So that's to let you know, towards Krasnohorivka here and Kamyanka area, so fighting going on around there, and Pervomaisky as well. To the north of Pervomaisky, there's Vodyanye, where they're trying to take Vodyanye and also move towards Siverny so they can envelop Avdivka, but also perhaps encircle Pervomaisky. And from the south, they're trying to do that at a place called Novelsky, but they are finding it quite difficult because it's really heavily fortified around there in the fields. Every tree line and hedgerow seems to have some kind of dug-in entrenchment. Finally, War Monitor, as a pro-Ukrainian source says, Ukrainian forces repelled a large assault in the direction of Avdivka from the direction of Opitny today, destroying 4 BMPs, those are infantry fighting vehicles, and causing Russian units to retreat to previously captured positions. So that is from the Opitny area, where they do have a little bit of a salient, as according to some Russian mappers, just going north towards Avdivka. So a repelled attack that's caused a loss of some equipment there. Okay, let's go on past another Krasnohorivka to Marinka again and see what is said about Marinka. Defmon says that repelled attacks around Marinka and Pobyeda, as you can see, towards Krasnohorivka, just north of Marinka, and south towards Pobyeda, and indeed in the southern areas of Marinka itself. I think pour les volants, see if there's any mapping for that. So we've got Avdivka. Oh no, that's Bakhmut from afar. And then, yeah, here we are. So you've got the attacks around Marinka indicated there. Also, pressure further south. I don't know if that seems to be south of Novomykhailivka, and indeed up towards Vuhledar again. And we'll show that on a map in a wee while. Just coming out of that. So if we go on to, let's have a look just in a second, at Rebar, that says on Telegram, not on their Twitter, so I've just got it to the side here. says that in Marinka, intense clashes continue in Marinka. Russian servicemen supported by tanks are storming enemy positions in the western parts of the city. We have heard this a lot from Rebar, so they claim that it's happening in the west when it seems to always be happening in the center. However, there are some claims that there are some gains for Russia in the center and in Marinka. It says Rebar continues that the command of the AFU, the Ukrainians, is hastily transferring additional units to the site. Let's have a look now at what ISWs say of Marinka. Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian troops broke through Ukrainian defensive lines in Pobyeda and gained new footholds within Marinka. Ukrainian General Staff detailed a successful strike on a Russian grouping in Marinka on February the 27th that destroyed 5 tanks and 7 BMP infantry fighting vehicles. On Telegram here, Wargonzo, who's a pro-Russian source, says that there is battles in the dachas near Vuhledar. We're going to talk about that in a second, but also that the Russians have pushed through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine southeast of Pobyeda. So that would be in this area here, pushing through there. I don't have confirmation of that. I mean, this is kind of what ISW is claiming, referencing the Wargonzo there. But as I said, there is some considerable destruction of, as according to different sources, of Russian vehicles in the Marinka area. I say different sources, that's the general staff. So again, you could take that with a pinch of salt, but 7 BMP and 5 tanks being destroyed around Marinka is pretty incredible. And then there are claims around Vuhledar. So we're going to go to Suryak Maps, who has some gains for the Russians in the Vuhledar area. Here it is. I'll just take you there on my map first. So as we come down south, turn the corner and come to Vuhledar, I've actually represented this increased ground or increased territory for the Russians on my map as well. But remember, this is a pro-Russian mapper, Suryak. So current situation of Vuhledar front. During the last weekend, the Russian army restarted the offensive to take Vuhledar and managed to enter the nearby dachas from the east. So, make of that what you will. It's not reflected in the Poulet Volant map here, although they are saying that there is attacking from there. And ISW says a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian naval and infantry elements are fighting towards Vuhledar from the Mikhilska dacha area and within Vuhledar itself, although ISW has not observed visual confirmation of Russian troops within Vuhledar. So it could be that there is fighting in Vuhledar, that Russians have made those gains. Just waiting confirmation for that. Vuhledar is on the heights, remember, overlooking Pavlivka and Mikhilska, and there are these dachas, which are these sort of more rural cottages and whatnot, both to the east, southeast, and to the south here. They've been pretty much flattened. We've had previous attempts for the Russians to attack from that direction, and also from Pavlivka, so from Mikhilska and from Pavlivka, to do a kind of give the Ukrainian defenders 2 directions to think about, but they have been successively repelled there. In fact, I've seen so much footage in the last couple of days, and again last night, of Russian mechanized units being taken out by all sorts of things. It could be a mix of mines and ATGMs, but mainly mines. And it's just incredible. All I can think is that they are just launching more and more mines by artillery into the area, and you just can't move mechanized units anywhere in this whole area, is my guess, because they're just going to be hit by mines. It's going to be blown up by mines. And I've seen visual confirmation of a ton of this happening. Just so much equipment wasted, and so therefore the only thing they can do is send the troops in, like by on foot, and it must be really difficult to ensure that they make any kind of gains there if they can only use infantry, especially when you've got the heights being controlled by the Ukrainians, and they can use drones to take them out, as well as spot for artillery that's particularly effective in the area. So there you go. That is what is happening in the Vuhledar area. Now, there's actually quite a bit to be said, not so much of Zaporizhia, although, well, actually, of both Zaporizhia and Kherson. So let's zoom out. This is the Zaporizhia Oblast here, and we have the Kherson Oblast there, which is kind of split into, if you like, by the Dnipro River. What does the ISW have to say? Well, actually, quite a lot that I think needs to be discussed. So, Ukrainian officials reported that Russian forces may be preparing for offensive operations in Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast. The Ukrainian General Staff reported the Russian forces are defending in Zaporizhia and Kherson, but are trying to create conditions that will allow Russian forces to conduct offensives in some unspecified areas of this part of the front. Ukrainian Mariupol mayoral advisor reported that Russian forces have transferred between 20 and 25,000 personnel from Mariupol Rayon, so that's a kind of little region, Donetsk Oblast, to unspecified areas of the front, although Russian forces likely transferred most of these personnel to areas of active offensive operations elsewhere in Donetsk Oblast. So there's rumors kicking about, and then it gets pretty interesting concerning the Dnipro River. A Ukrainian official reported that Russian forces are vulnerable to Ukrainian strikes on the Kupiansk-Spit in Mykolaiv and may be preparing to withdraw from positions closer to the Dnipro River on the east bank of the Kherson Oblast. Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesperson Humenyuk stated that Russian shelling of Mykolaiv Oblast has become less intense because Russian forces are hesitant to go to the end of the Kupiansk-Spit to shell Ochakiv, Mykolaiv Oblast and surrounding areas. Humenyuk stated that Ukrainian forces immediately locate Russian artillery units on the Kupiansk-Spit once they fire, and that these Russian units do not have enough time to evacuate the area before Ukrainian forces conduct counter-battery fire. Humenyuk also claimed that Russian forces are shelling Russian-occupied settlements on the east bank of the Kherson of the Dnipro in Kherson to give Russian occupation officials and forces a pretext to conduct evacuations from Oleshki, Skadovsk, and Novokakhovka and withdraw closer towards Crimea. Wow, so lots going on here. And in fact, we've got Novokakhovka getting hit, Holoprestan getting hit here with quite considerably in the evening. There's some video footage of that. And then, furthermore, this is no report saying spokeswoman for Operational Command South, so Humenyuk, in another instance, has said that on the Kupiansk-Spit, the Ukrainians have destroyed 4 boats that the Russians were going to use to send sabotage and reconnaissance groups from the area. Also, 2 artillery systems and 5 armored vehicles were destroyed. So there's a lot of activity going on in the Spit. And then, in fact, the ISW continues in this paragraph here. Geolocated footage published on the 27th claims to show Ukrainian special forces conducting a raid against Russian forces on Krykyuk Island, 4 kilometers south of Kherson, and likely indicated that's Kherson city, and likely indicates that Ukrainian forces hold positions on at least the northern part of neighboring Veliki Potemkin Island. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported that Russian sabotage and reconnaissance occasionally tried to move between the islands in the Dnipro in converted civilian vessels, and that Ukrainian forces destroyed 2 of these watercraft on February the 28th. And I've actually seen footage of Ukrainians destroying some buildings of troop accumulations on these sort of islands. So if you see Kherson there, you've got these islands to the south that do have settlements on them, stuff going on. They're not just sort of marshy river delta islands. These are islands with settlements on, as you can see. There's quite a lot of built up areas on these islands. So these are being contested at the moment. Different mappers will have different sort of control of these. We have Ukraine supposedly controlling the islands just opposite Kherson city itself. But yeah, boats have been destroyed there. There is raiding from both sides. But what's interesting is what's going on in the Spit area. So we have had historically quite a lot of shelling of Ukrainian positions in, say, Ochakiv, where I think there are Marines do their training. There are bases around here, little sort of ports, and they use these to launch attacks elsewhere. Well, these have come under continual barrage from artillery pieces on the Kupiansk-Spit and Peninsula, but they themselves, those Russian units, have been hit by counter battery fire. And I've shown you video footage of the people doing their work over here, like to try and observe and hit. And there's quite a lot of observation that goes along this coast of the Kimburn area. And as soon as they see stuff happening, they radio in and it gets hit. So the Russians appear to be getting hit quite badly, and they are pulling back. Meanwhile, as according to the Ukrainians, the Russians are hitting their own positions to the east here to give them an excuse to pull out and pull back towards Crimea. Of course, that could well be propaganda. I don't know. But yeah, lots of activity going on in and around Kherson from both sides here. But it does appear that the Ukrainians might be getting a little bit of an upper hand in the Kimburn Peninsula area, and the Russians might well be pulling back so that there is less shelling taking place in the Mykolaiv Oblast, which sort of stretches all the way over here to the Bug River, is that going north-south there. Anyway, that's the end of the update for today. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for all the members of the channel, and thank you for watching and for commenting so brilliantly down below. There's some great expertise that is shown in the comments, and I really do appreciate that. Anyway, take care. Speak to you possibly later, possibly not.